Hello there, this is Transfer Talk. Chelsea are making all the noise in the transfer window once again. We have the latest on Joao Felix, Conor Gallagher and Romelu Lukaku in just a moment. Jadon Sancho's Manchester United future is unclear as clubs in Europe express an interest in signing him. Sander Berge was wanted by United, but he might be heading elsewhere. And is Aaron Ramsdale's time at Arsenal coming to an end? We have fresh developments on his future in around 10 minutes' time. As you can see, we've got the two Dans here, Khan and Bardell. You'll be hearing from them in just a moment. But first of all, let's get straight to Chelsea. We can go live to our reporter, Gail Davis. Hi, Gail. More drama at Chelsea, it would seem, off the pitch. So what's the latest then on the futures of Joao Felix and Conor Gallagher?
Yeah, very good afternoon, Matt. It's never simple, is it? Especially when it comes to Chelsea transfers. So many moving parts, but very slowly they seem to be becoming aligned. The latest is that Joao Felix a deal has been agreed between Atletico Madrid and Chelsea, and that is a £42 million deal with the possibility of £4.3 million add-ons, and he will sign a 6-year contract, and that is with the option of a further year, so another very long-term deal signed at the club. And what this also means in terms of those moving parts is that Conor Gallagher, the path is a little bit clearer for him to join Atletico Madrid, who he thought he was joining last week, didn't he? It's been an unsettling kind of couple of weeks and days for him. He's just waiting to find out exactly when is the best time to go over and just very much finalise that deal for Madrid, because remember, he had his medical and he agreed those personal terms last week. Nothing happened. Back here at Chelsea training by himself. So that's the £36 million deal, and that just needs to all be signed and sealed as well. He's just waiting to see when he should get back on a plane. And in terms of Joao Felix, so it's another chance for him, isn't it, in the Premier League. He had a 6-month loan spell with Chelsea back in 2023 at Stamford Bridge, and it was 16 Premier League appearances and just the 4 goals. But again, when he arrived, there was a lot of players and there was a lot of change, and I suspect if you're a player this time, hopes he'll have a little bit more run, a little bit more longevity, and hope to sort of nail down that place. He's the sort of player, isn't he, that can play right across all the positions up front. And Chelsea created, didn't they, on the weekend? It was just sometimes that missing final piece, and perhaps he's the one to provide it.
Well, those two, they're probably going to happen now. What about Raheem Sterling? Is he surplus to requirements at Chelsea?
Well, Matt, that's probably not an answer that I should give of my own opinion, but it's the man, isn't it, Enzo Maresca, that really, really matters, and of course how Raheem Sterling feels about it. Enzo Maresca said when he wasn't part of the squad on Sunday that it was a technical reason. And we know about the statement, don't we, that was released by Sterling's representatives just before kick-off on Sunday. He'd been given, he says, no indication that he wasn't part of the squad. And in fact, if you looked on Chelsea's website earlier in the week, there was a whole piece about him being a leadership person as part of this sort of very young group at Chelsea. And 3 years left on his contract, isn't he? So Sterling, well, in terms of his position, he's happy and settled, but clearly he wants to be playing first-team football, and having played all 6 pre-season games, he felt very much part of that squad. What he wants, though, if he is to move, is something that is right for him and his family, who are settled down here in London. And time doesn't really seem to be on his side now, does it? So, as I mentioned, 3 years left on his contract. You suspect that the amount of words and pieces and people talking about Raheem Sterling over the last 2 days, it's only going to ramp up, isn't it, in the week or so that we've got left of this transfer window, sorry.
Yeah, you'd expect so, and I expect you'll probably be back there at some point in the next few days. Thanks very much, Gail. Right, so let's get into this with the Dans. Another player looks like likely in for big money, in Felix. You're going to have to sell some players at some point. So do you expect the rest of this window to be dominated more by outgoings than by incomings? Or, I mean, it's Chelsea, so you never know.
Yeah, I mean, when we get official confirmation of Felix, that'll take Chelsea spending for this window over £200 million. But I think what's really kind of dominated the conversation is just how big that squad size is, over 40 players and counting. And, you know, Gail there spoke about Raheem Sterling. We saw what happened over the weekend in terms of his statement, but he's just one of a number of players. You mentioned outgoings. You know, I think it was pretty clear over the last few weeks. You know, Enzo Maresca has talked about Ben Chilwell having to look elsewhere for minutes. Trevor Chalobah has been isolated out the squad, and you even have players, it's quite easy to forget, but like Cesar Casadei, who was, you know, on loan at Leicester last season for the first half of the season, he's not really part of it either. So there's quite a few players there who will either be looking for loans or perhaps permanent solutions, because perhaps what they signed up for, they're maybe not part of Enzo Maresca's plan. And this is what happens, of course, when you change managers and they have different styles of play.
Well, speaking of different styles, this is a very different way of doing things at Chelsea, isn't it, in terms of purchases, in terms of contracts. Dan, just explain to us how different it is from all the other Premier League sides.
I mean, it is almost unexplainable. I don't even know how to begin to explain this image that we've got up on the big screen here. What we've got here is the total contract years remaining across the entire squads in the Premier League. So you can see Chelsea are far, far and away ahead in terms of years left on contracts in the Premier League. The nearest club to them, Tottenham, Chelsea are almost double. We've never seen anything like this at all in the Premier League, and I've got to be honest, I don't know at all what Chelsea are doing. We saw recently Cole Palmer, new contract, 2033. Chelsea have got an abundance of players now, so let me set my pedometer to walk all the way over to the end of where Chelsea are. So basically, Chelsea, whenever a player is sold now, they have to pay up the duration that's left on a player's contract. So Raheem Sterling has obviously been linked with a move away at the moment. 3 years left on his contract. If he leaves, Chelsea have got to pay that up. They only signed him 2 years ago. So Chelsea's squad of 50 or whatever it is they've got at the moment, they're in a situation where if a player leaves, they have to pay up the entirety of that contract. And this is just like nothing we've ever seen in the Premier League before. Look at Man City all the way down there at 71, best in the business, won the Champions League recently, play a brand of football under a manager that we've never seen in the Premier League before. But what Chelsea are doing here, I can't explain. I've been asked to come up to the wall to talk about it. I almost don't know what to say because it just doesn't make any sense at all. We know some of the contracts that they dished out initially, were due to PSR. Premier League scrapped that and said that you could only amortise it over. But Chelsea are offering these ludicrous contracts. So I know Dan's got some thoughts around the American model and Chelsea's ownership under Todd Bowley. Hopefully he can make more sense of it than me, because I haven't got a clue.
Oh, you put pressure on me there,
you stood in front of the graphic and all we need to do was see that big yellow line.
That's an absolute joke.
I mean, as you said, I mean, it's so important to just keep mentioning, you know, this is unprecedented, probably in football, I think, not even just the Premier League, in terms of this strategy to rebuild a squad with young players. It's something you would see in the NBA or NFL when a squad is or a team is rebuilding over a few years. But the difference is you get first-round drafts, first picks, right, to bring in the next superstars. And, you know, I had a look at the LA Dodgers, which, you know, Todd Bowley, for example, is a part owner. Yeah. And, you know, you do see this a lot more in American sports. Some of the star names on that team, you know, Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, they're on 10-year contracts, 12-year contracts. Even someone called Will Smith, not that one, but he's on a 10-year contract as well. So, I mean, not to go on the theme of Will Smith, but it does feel like Chelsea are in the Wild West at the moment. Wild West. I should say, sorry. But they are, because this is unprecedented and there is no kind of conclusion as to how this might happen. There is a core, though, of young players who are on long-term contracts. So in theory, they have a squad settled now for the next decade. But then for every player you have settled with such a big squad, you have players like Raheem Sterling who are going to be unhappy. So how Todd Bowley and the ownership deal with this, we'll see. But also Enzo Maresca, I know he's the head coach, but he's still having to work with these players, and he's the one who's going to be asked about it every week in news conferences. Like Gail, I'm sure we'll be seeing him a lot this season.
There's just so much I don't understand. Like, we're using the word unprecedented constantly. You know, obviously teams have to be the first to do things like Pep with the inverted fullbacks. No one had ever done that before, and now everyone does it. But this isn't like a tactical thing, and we're comparing Chelsea to American sports. This isn't an American sport. The transfer market works in a completely different way in football to what it does in American sports. So I just cannot work out what they're trying to do, what the upside is, because all I can see is that they're lumbered with 40 to 50 players on huge contracts. They're changing manager every season. I think Raheem Sterling's had 6 managers already since he's been at Chelsea. Every manager that comes in has different tactical plans, has different ideas of what they want to do. No wonder players are going out of date so quickly, and Chelsea are just going to find themselves lumbered with these huge financial burdens, and they're going to struggle to move players on. I think we're going to see that as the window goes on, that players are going to end up staying at Chelsea that they don't want.
Well, they've got so many of them, haven't they? I mean, getting rid of all of them will be hard. I was expecting a couple more Will Smith songs in there.
I couldn't work out how to fit in Man in Black. I've been trying to think of it. Maybe next time.
Well, you almost got there. Wild West. Right, let's get to Manchester United. It could be a busy week for them as well. A number of European clubs are exploring a potential deal for forward Jadon Sancho. As it stands, he will stay at United. But this new interest makes Sancho definitely one to watch in the final 10 days of the window. Dan, given the history with Erik ten Hag, with the club, do you think a move, if one comes up, a move to a big European club would make the most sense for him?
I think regardless, once the window closes, I think that can be really the next chapter for Jadon Sancho, whether that's at Manchester United or another club. Because while the window's open, it is quite easy to have this narrative around what happened with Ten Hag last season, and of course he was so good at Borussia Dortmund in spells last season as well. Whereas when the window closes, at least he can finally move on, whether that's at United with the 4 other wingers who were there, the likes of Marcus Rashford, Alejandro Garnacho, Anthony Ahmad as well. But he can also play in the false 9 position, so there definitely is space for him at United. I think the question is who is out there in Europe who really needs that winger. You know, you look at PSG, they signed someone in this week, so they've potentially cooled their interest in Sancho. You look who else is out there in Europe. There doesn't seem a natural fit at the moment, so I think he's best off trying to get his way back into that United side. And I think there'd be nothing more than the fans at Old Trafford wanting to see Sancho succeed. It's just whether he's given the opportunity and whether he can really work his way into the system, I think.
I just can't see where he fits at the moment. It's good that they buried the hatchet and that he's not training with the kids and not allowed into the complex, things like that. Nobody wants to see stuff like that happening. But there's a lot of barriers to him getting into that Manchester United team. We saw he wasn't in the squad on Friday. Obviously, that was a little bit to do with illness. But now he's out that squad. So for him to get back in, someone's got to come out, and I don't see who that is. And people are talking about like the false 9 position as a fail-safe. Manchester United have got 2 recognised centre-forwards now that will want game time. I don't really see that as a viable option. The right-hand side looks like Ahmed's really made a play for that position to make that his own. They've got Anthony, who cost a lot of money there as well. On the other side, you've got Rashford and Garnacho, both their best football. So I think probably rules that position out. Number 10, Fernandes and Mount. So although we're saying Sancho can play in all these positions, I don't see at Manchester United when he's going to play in those positions with all those options.
Why do you think there's been no Premier League clubs associated with him in the last few days? We're just hearing that there might be some interest from European clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the interesting thing is, it's what does Jadon Sancho want? You know, does he want to be playing football, which you would imagine wants to play every week? But then you look at the other clubs in the Premier League. You know, unless you looked at Arsenal, for example, you know they're very settled with the likes of Trossard, Saka, Martinelli. Tottenham have a wealth of wingers as well. Likewise in Manchester City. So it doesn't seem that Jadon Sancho will want to be playing the highest level possible European football. And I think when you look in the Premier League, there's maybe, I mean, you might say Aston Villa, but maybe there's not perhaps a natural fit, and maybe he's best off just working his way into that United side. Strength and depth. These teams are now playing over 60 games a season. I think we need to get away from 2, 3 players enough. These teams need strength and depth, and he'll get opportunities this season, I think.
I guess wage and transfer fee would be the barriers for Premier League clubs, but then we know that the Premier League's the league that carries the most amount of money. So if it's a barrier for Premier League clubs, probably going to be a barrier for clubs outside of the Premier League as well. I think in an ideal world, he probably would have moved to Dortmund, but Dortmund, although they facilitated the loan deal in the second half of last season, the way they operate as a club fundamentally, they're not going to pay the kind of transfer fee that Sancho is going to command, and they're not going to be able to afford the wages. So again, it kind of leaves a player stuck, because I think the ideal place for him to play his football now would be Dortmund, because we saw what he did in the Champions League last season.
OK, in terms of midfield, Man United have been looking for a midfielder for much of this window, and Manuel Ugarte remains a live option. Talks continue with Paris Saint-Germain over his signing. As it stands, Scott McTominay will remain at Old Trafford, and as a result, Manchester United may have to be creative when it comes to potential incomings. I mean, we've spoken about midfielders, central midfielders in Man United for the last couple of weeks, and the fact that we've come up with so many different names, I mean, now it seems like Ugarte is in pole position. He's the one they've zeroed in on. But the fact that we've mentioned so many names, does that suggest that there isn't an obvious option to improve the midfield?
Yeah, I think it depends what angle you look at this, because actually you could look at maybe half cup full in terms of actually Manchester United under Ineos. I think when you've looked at who they've signed this year, they really have had alternative options for each signing they've made, which actually, perhaps compared to previous windows, they've had one target and pursued that one target all window. So I think actually having different options for midfield could be positive. I think Ugarte would make a lot of sense. He's a bit younger. They need a number 6, I think, to really give Mainu a bit of a break, but also rotate in and out with Casemiro as well. So I think he would be a natural fit. He's tenacious, he can play with the ball, and he's happy to put a tackle in as well. So perhaps it just alleviates the pressure off Casemiro a little bit, and also doesn't put as much pressure on Mainu as well at just 19 years old.
OK, well, next we are off to Paris. Not literally, sadly, we're just going to be going live there. News of potential incomings at West Ham, Tottenham and Fulham. To transfer talk, we're going to speak to French football expert now. Jonathan Johnson is in Paris for us. Hi, Jonathan. Thanks very much for having a chat. Let's get right into it. We've just been talking about Manuel Ugarte. We seem to have been talking about him for most of the month in terms of possibly going to Manchester United. Is there growing optimism now that a deal can be done between PSG and Man U?
Well, certainly there's still a feeling that PSG can and will let Ugarte go if a deal can possibly be reached with United. The main stumbling block this summer has been the fact that the two clubs' valuation of the player, it has been quite some way apart. But Ugarte wasn't involved in PSG's opening game of the season last week, so there is still a feeling that he is one of the players that the French champions will look to move on before the end of this transfer window. Obviously, a player that United remain interested in, and the dialogue has never really broken up between United and PSG this summer, given PSG's interest in Jadon Sancho as well.
Hi, Jonathan. Afternoon. Just on the theme of Manchester United, I mean, do PSG still want Jadon Sancho, or do you think they'll be looking elsewhere, or do you think they'll be happy with their squad?
I think the situation has changed a little bit after the opening game of the season. Gonzalo Ramos picking up an injury that's probably going to keep him out for a couple of months as opposed to a couple of weeks. And that now has prompted a bit of a rejig in terms of PSG's thinking. Are they still interested in Jadon Sancho's profile? Yes, he's a player they identified at the beginning of the summer who could possibly, fill their needs in the squad, and give them a real sort of right-sided presence in the attack. However, with this injury to Ramos, that means that there's no real possibility of moving Randall Colomwani on between now and the end of the transfer window, so they'll stick with him in the middle and now possibly look for somebody who might be a little more complementary. So the name Ademola Lookman of Atalanta has surfaced in recent days, and there's now speculation that he perhaps has moved slightly ahead of Sancho in PSG's pecking order.
Hi, Jonathan. Sticking with PSG, Carlos Soler is in talks with, West Ham are in talks with PSG to sign Carlos Soler at the moment. What would he bring to their midfield? They've obviously improved their midfield already this summer. Where would he fit into West Ham?
Yeah, Soler's a really interesting one because he's got quite a versatile profile. He's certainly played a number of positions since he joined PSG a couple of years ago. Unused substitute last week in PSG's opening game, but he did make the matchday squad. So I think there is a feeling that Luis Enrique could still use if he doesn't end up doing. However, Soler, in terms of what was expected from him at the very beginning of his time with PSG, I think many people expected him to be a very creative presence. He's been a bit more workmanlike than that, but that's also because of the way that he's been deployed by a number of different coaches. And I think West Ham would be getting somebody who is potentially a very creative player, if everybody remembers him at his best in Valencia back in La Liga. A really superb player, and many people felt that PSG were getting an absolute bargain back then. And although he has proved to be decent value in the fact that he could fit in a number of different positions, whether it's a more central midfield role, whether it's even a fullback or wingback at times, he is somebody who has added value to the squad. So I think the Hammers will be getting a very interesting type of player who could potentially fill a number of needs.
Moving on to Everton, there are reports linking Neil Maupay with a move away. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, bad news for Marseille with a serious injury in the attacking ranks to Moubandia. So that means that Marseille will now be looking to make an attacking reinforcement. And Maupay has been sort of suggested as a bit of a low-cost approach, given that this has been quite a busy transfer window for Marseille so far. But they hit the ground running under Roberto De Zerbi in their opening game, really blowing out last season's surprise package Brest. And there has also been speculation that they're making a move on Norwich's Jonathan Rowe. That speculation isn't anything new. It's been around for a couple of weeks now, and it feels like Rowe is perhaps the main priority for Marseille at this moment in time, with Maupay possibly being the player that they pivot to if it continues to be problematic for the Norwich man.
Jonathan, we saw Tottenham in action last night, first Monday night football of the season. Just wondering, with a few weeks left to go of the window, could there be one more incoming, do you think, for Spurs?
Yeah, there's a name that's certainly started to surface over here in France, and that's Monaco's Van der Sar, primarily a right back, right wing back. So definitely one to watch between now and the end of the window. Whether or not Monaco would feel that they can move him on and potentially move for somebody else to sort of fill in, that remains to be seen. But he's definitely a player that Monaco sort of wouldn't stand in the way of leaving if a suitable offer did arrive from the likes of the Tottenham.
Finally, Jonathan, just a quick word on Thierry Henry. He has resigned as the France under-21 boss. Why is that? Is there another move potentially on the cards?
Yeah, this one's a curious one because obviously he hasn't been in the position or hadn't been in the position for a terribly long time, although there was always a feeling that it was very much an appointment made for the Olympic Games, and he took the French team all the way to the final. They ended up as silver medalists, of course. There was speculation as well linking Henry with the USMNT, the US men's national team position. So that is something that has died off a little bit, obviously, since the Mauricio Pochettino taking that position has cropped up on the radar. So there is now a feeling that perhaps with his reputation at managerial level restored a little bit, that Henry could be perhaps looking at a return to the club game. But there was always a feeling, I think, that with Zinedine Zidane the obvious choice to replace Didier Deschamps at the head of the French national team after the 2026 World Cup cycle, that this was one for Henry to potentially get himself back into the managerial game and possibly put himself back on the market after the Olympics, which now seems to be the case.
Great stuff, very informative as ever. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Right, let's get to Arsenal because Wolves are in talks with them over the signing of goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale. They're exploring a loan with an option to buy. Arsenal want to do a permanent deal that comes with an obligation to buy. Very interesting this, isn't it? Because Jose Sarr is already in place as the number one at Wolves. Does this suggest perhaps a different direction that Gary O'Neill wants to go in terms of brand of football?
Yeah, perhaps. I think they've started the season going to a back four compared to a back five they played with last season. I think when you look at Wolves' business so far this summer, you know, the likes of Maximilian Kilman, Pedro Neto both leaving for a combined kind of sum of over £90 million. I think what the sporting director, Matt Hobbs, and Gary O'Neill have been very clear about is they've planned for this. You know, so for Maximilian Kilman, they had Urs and Mosquera ready to come into the side. Pedro Neto leaving. They had Rodrigo Gomez they signed earlier in the window to play on that flank. And I think if Ramsdale was to happen, I'm sure they've been forward planning in that sense as well. So you would likely, I think, see a departure of either Darren Bentley or Jose Sarr. I think in terms of style of play, you know, just looking at simple statistics, you know, when you compare Ramsdale's last full season at Arsenal compared to Jose Sarr last season at Wolves, again, style of play can have a say in those stats, but Ramsdale's pass percentage is obviously much better, accuracy is much better, and I think when you watch Jose Sarr, he's a very good shot stopper, but I do think his distribution sometimes can be lacking, which, of course, that is a huge strength of Aaron Ramsdale. So I think if Wolves are to maybe transform their play a bit this season, I think it'd be a real statement signing for Gary O'Neill.
Do you think it'd be a good move for Ramsdale himself as well? I mean, you know, he was associated with Newcastle a few months ago. That never materialised. Nick Pope is still there. He's back now from injury. There was interest from Ajax, but there's not been much else. So, you know, Wolves or Ajax, you think Wolves would be a good move for him?
I think it'd be a brilliant move for him. It keeps him in the Premier League. What you have to remember is that out of all the markets that there is, the goalkeeper market's the worst. If you're a goalkeeper that's not playing, you've almost got to wait for someone to take a chance or another goalkeeper to move. Now, Wolves looking for a goalkeeper has probably come as a surprise to us today when that news broke this morning. But as Dan says, Gary O'Neill's quite an innovative manager. He's had to deal with a lot since he's been at Wolves, and he's dealt with everything really, really well. He's kind of like trying to change the style and change the mentality of the club, but he keeps losing players. Ramsdale's a leader as well. He'd be a big presence in that dressing room. He was a big presence in the England dressing room in the summer, despite not playing. He's a good character, and through no fault of his own, really, he's lost his place at Arsenal. Again, when Arsenal signed a goalkeeper, signed Raya, I don't think Arsenal fans were crying out for a new number one. So, although I think Raya is a step up, I think Ramsdale can count himself a little bit unfortunate, but he won't want another wasted season because last season was a wasted season, really. He only got into the Arsenal team when they played Brentford, because Raya couldn't play in those games because he was on loan. Those opportunities are gone now. For him to go to a club like Wolves, play every week, work under an excellent goalkeeping coach in Neil Cutler, I think that's as good a move as Aaron Ramsdale could hope for at the moment.
OK, let's get up to the other end of the pitch then. And Arsenal won over £30 million for Eddie Nketiah as talks continue with Nottingham Forest for the striker. Again, this is another interesting one, isn't it? Because Nottingham Forest have got two out-and-out strikers there. They've got Chris Wood, they've got Taiwo Awoniyi. So where does Nketiah fit into all of this? Does he come in as the number one?
Yeah, I mean, two very good forwards as well,
Yeah.
you know, who have shown it in the Premier League over the last 2 seasons. Chris Wood, very impressive last season, 14 goals. He really led the line because Taiwo Awoniyi had a groin injury for much of last season. So they have two very good forwards. I think Eddie Nketiah is just a different profile, isn't he? You know, very good in the box, but he can also stretch defences as well. And I think actually you put him in that front four with the likes of Morgan Gibbs-White, Callum Hudson-Odoi, who he knows at the England underage levels, and then Anthony Elanga. You know, that is a very exciting front four, full of pace, full of speed, and actually would cause most defences in the league a bit of an issue, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I think Nketiah, if he's going there, he's getting certain guarantees that he's going to play, and Forest aren't spending £30 million on someone to sit on the bench.
Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense. Just one more line, Arsenal remain in talks with Real Sociedad over the signing of midfielder Mikel Merino. That seems like their next big target. It's thought the clubs are finalising the payment structure and the makeup of the performance-related add-ons. We will keep you posted on that one. Next, though, we've got an update from Newcastle. Could Joe Gomez be an option instead of Mark Guehi? Plus, could Ilkay Gundogan return to Manchester City? Stay tuned. transfer market. Our reporter Keith Downey is at the training ground now.
Newcastle's interest in Crystal Palace defender Marc Guéhi remains, and you would suggest probably has intensified following the sending off of Fabian Schär at the weekend, leaving Newcastle very short in central defensive options, with Schär set to miss the next 3 matches through suspension. At the end of last week, Newcastle got to a 4th offer for the Crystal Palace defender of £60 million plus £5 million in add-ons. As I understand it, negotiations are still taking place behind the scenes between the two clubs. But without doubt, this has become a saga. He is Newcastle's #1 defensive target, and I don't think their move for the England international at this stage is dead yet. As I say, talks continue, but I think Newcastle clearly looking at other options, and rightly so. They need to do so in case Crystal Palace decide that Newcastle's offers do not match their valuation of the player. Joe Gomez is a player that they have looked at previously. I'm unsure whether that is one that they would revisit this transfer window. Malik Chow is another player that's been watched extensively at AC Milan. And Newcastle, I think without doubt, will bring in a central defender. The question is, will they break their transfer record to bring in England defender Guéhi, or will they look at a more cheaper option to allow them to then spend in other areas of the park where they perhaps need reinforcements, most notably in the right wing position? I think we'll find out in the next few days, but Newcastle were working to a tight deadline with 11 days of the transfer window to go, but come the end of the window, Fabian Schär will be back and available, so you would suggest their need for a central defender right now, due to his suspension, is even more pressing.
Yeah, sounds like it. Cheers, Keith. We will stay on top of that Newcastle search for a central defender. Now, how about this? Barcelona are open to let İlkay Gundogan leave before the deadline. Gundogan is also thought to be open to leaving, and his representatives are contacting various clubs. Manchester City have been linked with taking him back, former player, of course. They haven't done much business, the champions, so far, and this is a former player, but do you think it's still one that could really excite the fans?
Yeah, I mean, he was so important, wasn't he, in his 7-8 year spell at Manchester City. I mean, let's not forget he captained the side to their kind of historic treble-winning season. And, you know, he had such an impressive first spell at Manchester City. I mean, you look at some of the stats. I mean, you can see on the totem there, I mean, almost 200 games. Mention the major honours. I mean, let's not forget as well the end of the 2021-22 season. Dan, you'll remember very well him scoring those vital goals against Aston Villa on the final game of the season. But he was so pivotal for Manchester City. I mean, towards the end of his spell there, it felt like he chipped in with so many important goals from midfield.
12 major honours, 188 games. I mean, my maths is terrible. What's that? It's about 16 games per honour.
That's better maths than
That's ridiculous.
Not my strong point.
I just guessed that, by the way, something like that. Guys, they do say never go back. I mean, that's probably an advice that I should have taken earlier on in my life, but I didn't. But in terms of football, does it work out positively most of the time or not?
Well, let's go now. I would say let's go and have a look. I want to hear more about your never go back, to be honest.
Never time.
Right then, we've selected a few players then that have previously gone back to a club where they've spent time before, haven't we, Dan? Going to start with Didier Drogba then. Won pretty much everything, I think, in his first spell at Chelsea, including an all-important winning penalty in the Champions League final. But he did go back for that second spell to be understudy to Diego Costa, and actually scored a few goals in that second spell as well. So I think we could probably chalk that one off as a success. Next to him, I know it's one of Dan's favourites here, Cristiano Ronaldo.
Why is he so upset?
I mean, that's how he looked for virtually the entirety of his second spell.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you about Drogba. I think we can put that as a success. I think Cristiano Ronaldo, we know how he left, obviously, with that interview he did. Erik ten Hag dealt with it pretty swiftly. But I will tell you, for most Manchester United fans, that moment he gave them, when he made his kind of first appearance back, 2 goals against Newcastle, I don't think many fans I think the ecstasy everyone felt in that moment was pretty special, I think. So
you said earlier that it was the best day of your life.
Not my life. I thought the fans, you know, anyway. But yeah, it didn't end very well from his facial expression. But, I mean, he's still a legend at Old Trafford, and, maybe it wasn't the second spell they desired, maybe. But what about Defoe?
Well, Harry Redknapp had a massive part to play in Jermaine Defoe returning to Tottenham, where Harry Redknapp was managing at the time. Ironically, it was actually Harry Redknapp that signed Jermaine Defoe from Tottenham for Portsmouth. Redknapp went to Tottenham, got Defoe back. Do you think Defoe scored more goals in his first spell?
I think second spell, no?
It was second spell. I feel like you've been on Wikipedia.
Never.
Before we've done this, just like I was. But yeah, Defoe scored a bagload of goals in both spells at Tottenham. Paul Pogba, another Manchester United man, obviously left on a free to go to Juventus in the Sir Alex Ferguson era, and then I think it was Jose Mourinho that brought Paul Pogba back. Won a few trophies, but I don't think for the fee that they paid we can say that was a success, Dan.
I think, funnily enough, I think when you look back at Pogba's second spell at the club, I think you'd probably struggle to maybe mention a top 5 moments in that second spell, considering how long he was at the club. Maybe you go back to the Manchester City game when they could have won the title, and he was pivotal in that comeback. I think they were 2 goals down, came back to win that game. But, again, really unfortunately, he was hampered by a few injuries. But again, we just never saw the best of Paul Pogba compared to maybe a France shirt or his first spell at Juventus.
Yeah, and Wayne Rooney finished his Premier League career at Everton, did go on to play for Derby County and play in America as well, but his Premier League career finished at Everton. Left his first spell quite early at a young age to go to Manchester United, didn't he? But he was brought in more than in a leadership role in his second spell at Everton, wasn't he?
For sure, and I think let's not forget as well, he did have some really special memories. Although, like you said, he was at the end of his career at Everton. He still scored his 200th goal in an Everton shirt. That would have meant a lot to him. It was against Manchester City, of all teams, as well. And he also got to lead them in Europe as well, in the Europa League. So he at least got to have a bit of fun towards the end of his career back at his boyhood club. What about Robbie Keane? I mean, compared to Jermaine Defoe, both going back to Spurs, I mean, how successful was he?
Yeah, again, Harry Redknapp was up to his old tricks in 2009. Robbie Keane left for Liverpool for around 20 million in 2008. And about 5-6 months later, he was back at Tottenham because Harry Redknapp was trying to get the old Tottenham front line back together, as we discussed earlier. Just a brilliant, brilliant footballer, Robbie Keane, one of my favourite ever Premier League players. And yeah, both spells at Tottenham. Again, full of goals, another leader at Tottenham. It was a success. The final one, I think one of the most recent ones on this list that we've got is Romelu Lukaku. Chelsea fresh from winning the Champions League under Thomas Tuchel. I remember doing podcasts and shows and talking about how this was the final piece in the Tuchel-Chelsea jigsaw. Lukaku's going to go there, get the goals to make Chelsea Premier League champions. And Dan, that just didn't happen. And they're still trying to offload him today.
No, and I think when you look at his transfer history, I mean, we've done it on the show before, we thought that when he went to Manchester United. And again, as you mentioned, I mean, we've never really seen that player we saw at Everton all those years ago as he was coming through. And, funnily enough, he was supposed to be the heir to this man, Didier Drogba, and unfortunately it never happened. But, I mean, I just love Robbie Keane, really, and we'll start going back in a second, but I just love the celebration as well. I mean, some of these players, iconic. But I think, Matt, I mean, to conclude, I think as we come back, is it better to go back? I don't know. I don't think we can really conclude from this. Probably not. But I do think with Gundogan, really interesting solution for Manchester City because they perhaps are missing that link in midfield. The only thing I don't want to see is if they do re-sign Gundogan, it's to stop the progress of someone like James McAtee because Pep Guardiola has been really high on him in pre-season as the seasons began. And I know it would be romantic to have Gundogan back, but I would love to see James McAtee get more games time instead.
I think it's a no-brainer for both Gundogan and Manchester City. They missed him last year. They only won, I don't say only won one trophy, but in those clutch moments that Gundogan wasn't there in the seasons before, he was the player that was providing those big moments. He's a leader. He hasn't lost any ability in the year. He's been away. It's just the circumstances of Barcelona and how they operate that he's available. So to get him back on a free when they're looking for a midfielder, no-brainer.
I don't think their rivals will be particularly happy with Gundogan coming back now. Arsenal and Liverpool will not be happy about that. Right, Brighton are making serious moves in the transfer window. Will they sign Matt O'Reilly next? We've also got an update on Scott McTominay's future. Stay tuned. Hi there, welcome back to Transfer Talk. Fulham have agreed a deal with Burnley for Sander Berge. He will have a medical this morning. We believe the fee is an initial 20 million plus 5 million in performance-related add-ons. It's understood Fulham made a similar offer to Manchester when they reopened talks over Scott McTominay. Dan, if I come to you first, they do need a replacement, Fulham, for Joao Felix. Berger's not exactly the same player, but does he have similar qualities to Palhinha?
I think in terms of a physical presence, he brings that. He's 6 foot plus like Joao Felix, but he's still a different type of midfielder. Palhinha, I think, is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
We saw whenever he was missing for Fulham, they simply weren't the same outfit. I think Marco Silva's done a brilliant job since Fulham returned to the Premier League. 2 years, no worries of relegation at all. And I don't think they'll be in trouble again this season because he's a tremendous manager. But they've lost a big player there. And I do think, honestly, whoever they get in, they'll struggle to match up to what Palhinha does, because Palhinha is that good, as we've seen by the fact he's ended up at Bayern Munich.
What do you think it means for their pursuit of Scott McTominay?
I mean, they've had 2 bids rejected already by Manchester United for McTominay. So, I mean, this screams that they've pivoted from one target to another. They've obviously known Berge is available, and they've done well to kind of offer similar money that they were looking at for McTominay, but get Berge done. And I think now teams, with a few weeks left of the window, just need to get their business done because the season's began now. So it's about getting those players in and getting them adapted to their teams as soon as possible, really.
OK, how about Brighton, by the way? They are making some serious moves. They've made a formal bid for Celtic's Matt O'Reilly. Nothing has been agreed yet, but the clubs are locked in talks, which will continue over the next few days. In terms of what O'Reilly will bring if he's signed, I mean, this is a free-scoring Brighton side already, as we saw in the first game of the season. What's he going to add?
And he's somewhat of a free-scoring, free creative midfielder as well. I mean, when you look at how impressive he was for Celtic in the Scottish Premiership last season, double digits goals and assists. And I think, if I was a Brighton fan, I'd be really excited to see him added to all the attacking talent they already have. I think also, let's not forget, Atalanta have had 5 bids for O'Reilly rejected. And, you were talking about Brighton's business earlier and how impressive it is. To me, it feels Brighton have monitored this situation. I know he's someone they've admired for a long time. And they probably have seen this, know what value they're going to be looking for Celtic. And we're going to try and get this done nice and quickly.
Brighton have changed up their mode of operating in this transfer window.
Yeah, I think there's still similarities in that they're targeting younger players who they think will grow in value. But the difference with this window is, compared to others, is that they're spending more initially. You look at that window in summer 2022, only £33.5 million spent on Estupiñán, Gilmour, Enciso and Adingra. They had 2 big sales in Cucurella and Bissouma, who they made huge profits on. So that was probably the start of Brighton starting to make that really impressive transfer strategy. £84.1 million spent the summer after, bringing in nearly 200 million. João Pedro, Baleba, Verbruggen and Igor came in, with Sanchez, Caicedo and McAllister moving out. Caicedo obviously carries the ball. Senegal's there made a huge profit on him. And it's this summer where there's a huge difference. They brought 7 players in for 142 million, and they're probably, the owners at Brighton will be looking at it and thinking, 40.5 million coming in. We're not used to that. But I think Brighton have got the flexibility to be in that position now, just because of how they've operated over the last 2 or 3 summers. They've given themselves so much wiggle room that they're one of the few teams that haven't even had to think about PSR the last few years.
Yeah. So well run, aren't they? Jorginho Ruta's coming in as well for about £40 million. That's going to be a record signing. Overall, is there a strong argument to say that Brighton have won the transfer window so far? I
mean, it's so impressive, isn't it? I mean, the business they do, and quite often when they make their incomings, a lot of them seem to be very successful. And I think Ruta's very interesting, 22, 23 years old, really good age. And I think when he first came to England, you think he's a number 9. But in Brighton's system, and when you look at what he did at Leeds last year, 15 assists in the Championship, the way João Pedro and Danny Welbeck kind of interchange between a number 9, a second striker, number 10, you just think actually that could suit Ruta really well. And I think if Fertzer gets his hand on him, I mean, it'd be very exciting again if you're a Brighton fan.
As usual, guys, we're running out of time. So this last little bit we're going to do very quickly. You've both chosen one club that you think will be busy in the last few days of the transfer window. Dan, who have you gone and why?
I mean, I want an Ivan Toney clause in my answer, but if he leaves, Brentford, are going to have to be busy. They kind of already replaced Tony with the Igor Thiago, but he's injured until probably January 2025. So, on the face of it, Tony, if he was to go, they haven't had Mopé back, who played a lot of games last season. I think they'd need an attacker, and it would be interesting to see what direction. We're
going to sit there, but anyway,
I'll save it.
Very briefly, Dan, who you gone with?
I'll be very quickly. I was at Monday Night Football last night. Having watched Spurs, I just think they need one more midfield. I think Bergvall and Archie Gray coming off the bench, maybe just a bit too young. We'll see what happens with Basuma, but I think they just need one more midfielder to shore up that midfield.
Very concise. Thank you very much, guys. Really enjoyed today. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Good morning, transfers. Then, of course, transfer talk at midday. And, of course, today later on, you can get the transfer show. 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock, they will round up all of the day's relevant transfer news. Coming up, though, our chief reporter, Kaveh Solokul, is on set with the latest on Joao Felix's move to Chelsea.